Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.
And again, and welcome to all those that have joined us since I saw you a half hour ago. So tonight we actually are going to crack First Thessalonians. And so if you've got Bibles and you want to look, you can. We're actually going to read the section together in just a bit. But before we get into the section tonight of Thanksgiving, I wanted to read verse 1. And I won't share the screen, I will for the next part. But verse 1, if you've got a Bible, most of us would know in the REV, which I'm reading from tonight, verse 1 of chapter 1 says, Paul and Silvanus and Timothy to the church of the Thessalonians and God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, grace to you and peace. So we've got a greeting, but actually, and we talked about this briefly last week, we have a greeting of a type of writing in the Bible that's called a what? A letter, exactly. I do. It's the wordsmithing with the mutes there. So we're actually talking about a letter. So actually, before we start reading the letter of First Thessalonians, then Jerry, I thought we'll start. We're going to open up and let Jerry go here. Jerry, tell us, what should we keep in mind regarding reading letters generally in the New Testament, and specifically reading this letter of First Thessalonians? What should we keep in mind knowing that we're reading a letter?
Well, it's a good question. We are looking at a particular type of literature here in the New Testament. We would categorize it in a particular genre. You know, a genre is a type of literary category that has particular features to it. And there are different genres. I mean, if anybody has ever read any literature, you know there are novels, there's poetry, there are newspapers, there are magazines. It's just there's lots of different ways to put literature together, and there's lots of different styles as well. There's like biography, documentary, fiction, nonfiction. There's all these different categories. We're going to be talking about letters, and particularly I want to share something with you about what is special about letter writing in the first century, when Paul actually composed this letter to the Thessalonians. So I'd like to share with you guys a little presentation to help walk through some of the unique features that we need to sort of like have our mind oriented toward as we begin to read this letter together. So let's see if I can make my tablet work here. Nope, that didn't work. Swipe. Oh, press the enter. All right. So there are a lot of letters that we've discovered. Papyri, it's a early form of paper, and we've had these letters that have been discovered. One of the most famous ones comes from the 2nd century from the region of Alexandria in Egypt, and it's called the letter of Apion, because the person who wrote it, his name was Apion. This is the actual image of it. Let's just do a little translation here. It goes, Apion to Epimachus, his father and Lord, very many greetings. Before all else, I pray for your health, and that you may always be well and prosperous, together with my sister and her daughter and my brother. I thank the Lord Serapis, that when I was in danger at sea, he straightway saved me. On arriving at Misenum, I received from Caesar 3 gold pieces for traveling expenses. And it is well with me. Now I ask you, my Lord and Father, write me a letter telling me first of your welfare, secondly of my brothers and sisters, and enabling me thirdly to make obeisance before your handwriting, because you educated me well, and I hope thereby to have quick advancement, if the gods so will. Give many salutations to Capiton and my brother and sister, and Saranilla and my friends. I have sent you by Euctemon a portrait of myself. My name, my Roman name, is Antonius Maximus. My company, the Athenonica, I pray for your health. So this is a letter from the first century, and it's very similar to a lot of other letters. Now, when we talk about letters, we're mainly interested in some structural elements.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Let me try and break this down, because this is going to parallel the way Paul writes. There are several common components to almost all first century letters. There's an address and salutation, which is what we just read in 1 Thessalonians 1:1. Well, we see it here in the letter of Apion. He addresses who it's to. It's to his Father and his Lord, Epimachus. And his salutation is very many greetings to you. That's what he's saying. He's giving him a salutation of very many greetings. The greeting Paul often gives is grace and peace. Then there's often a prayer and thanksgiving, and a body, and then a farewell and conclusion. Now, if we take this and we look at, okay, well, does Paul actually write this way in the New Testament, especially the letter to the Thessalonians? Well, this is the breakdown. He has these exact same features. He has an address and a salutation. He has a prayer and a thanksgiving. He has a body of the main part of his letter, and he has a concluding section. And we're going to go through all of these over the next number of weeks. But it's important to know, well, what part of the letter are you currently reading? And we're going to read chapter 1, which includes the address and salutation, as well as the opening, or what's called the epistolary introduction. Very common to give a prayer and a thanksgiving, and also introduce some ideas or some things that he wants to bring up in the beginning of the letter, of which he's going to more fully develop later on. Now, New Testament letters, they are letters written to other people. We see this letter is written to the church at Thessalonica. So what we're doing is we're kind of reading somebody else's mail. We are reading something that was written to somebody else. So technically, these letters aren't written to us. We are not the recipients of these letters. However, that doesn't mean they're meaningless. They have relevance to us as Christians and followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're applicable to helping to guide our faith. So while we're not the recipients, we can learn a great deal about them and understand the way that the Apostle Paul was trying to lead and direct the early church. The next thing is that these letters they didn't just appear in a vacuum. They didn't drop out of the sky. Paul is writing as the founding apostle of the church in Thessalonica. He's writing a letter to them because of certain circumstances. As we talked about before, it's called the occasion of the letter. Why did Paul write the letter? What was the occasion? Well, we went through Acts 17, and the thing was he actually got forced out of the city early. And when he sent Timothy back, and then Timothy returned and brought a report, that then prompted him to write a letter in response to the report and what he had heard from Timothy. And he wanted to just express to them certain personal sentiments of how much he missed them and loved them. So when we read the letter, we're going to have to read it according to the target audience to whom it was written, which is not us, but the Thessalonians. And then we're going to have to appropriate it to ourselves. So then what does that conclude us with? Well, we need to just understand that we're an external audience. We are onlookers trying to read this letter written 2,000 years ago in a foreign country, to a foreign people that we don't have strong connection with, and we live in a world completely different than theirs. And furthermore, we have limited context to understand what actually they were dealing with and why Paul writes certain things to them. So we're going to try to put together the puzzle of what Paul is saying and why, because then we can appropriate it to ourselves. And that's what we need to do. We need to take the letter that was written to them and find its relevancy to us today and how it's to lead and guide our faith and our life as a community of Christ followers. So I want to leave you guys with three things. There are three contexts we need to bear in mind as we're going to go through the letter: a historical, a literary, and a theological context. The historical context is that we need to read with respect to a first century audience. We are a 21st century audience trying to read a first century letter. Therefore, we have to be sensitive to geographical, cultural, social, political, and situational contexts. We went over some of those last week to try to orient ourselves to where is Thessalonica and what was going on, what happened when Paul was there, and so on. We also have a literary context which deals with first century letter writing genre, which means we have to understand what type of styles they're going to use, the structure to be expected, and specific literary devices that were common conventions at the time that Paul wrote. And finally, we need to be conscious of a theological context with which Paul wrote his letters, which means that Paul wrote the letters not just for the sake of writing a letter because he had nothing better to do. He wrote a letter because he had pastoral concerns and he was the spiritual leader of the Thessalonian church, and he was not there. And he wanted to offer his guidance to them as an apostle of Jesus Christ, but also as a dear friend and beloved brother in the Lord. So we need to read Paul's letter looking for the spiritual intent behind why he wrote what he wrote to them. What was his desired outcome? And how is he seeking to try to build their faith or promote spiritual growth within their community, and so on and so forth. So these are some important things to keep in mind as we are going to be reading this awesome letter. So Jeff, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And how do we begin looking at this epistolary introduction of the Apostle Paul to the Thessalonians?
So Jerry, first, thank you. I mean, that backdrop, helping us understand how to approach the letter and the eyes to look with, just makes a significant difference. And so with that in mind, what we'll begin tonight is simply to read this section. And based on what Jerry just taught us, we know that we actually already read the introduction section, which is one verse. And so now tonight, we're going to focus on what section of the letter. It's the Thanksgiving. I heard it from Pam. So it must be true. So what we'll do is we'll read verses 2 to 10. And if this works, you've got it up on the screen so you can read together. You can read with me, or if you've got your own version, you can read in your own version. So let's read this section of Thanksgiving, and then we're just going to dialogue together about some of the key points and highlights around it tonight. So, beginning in chapter 1, verse 2, we give thanks to God always for all of you, constantly remembering you in our prayers, remembering before our God and Father your work motivated by trust and labor prompted by love and endurance based on hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. For we know, brothers and sisters, loved by God, that you were chosen, because our good news did not come to you in word only, but also in power and in the Holy Spirit and in much assurance. You know the kind of people we were among you for your sake. And you became imitators of us and of the Lord, having received the word with joy from the Holy Spirit, in spite of much affliction, so that you became an example to all those who believe in Macedonia and Achaia. For the word of the Lord has sounded forth from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but your trust toward God has gone out into every place, so that we do not need to say anything. For they themselves are reporting about us, our manner of entering in among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve a living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, the one who rescues us from the wrath to come. Okay, so this is our Thanksgiving section of the letter of 1 Thessalonians. So what we want to do is we really want to highlight, first of all, sort of we want to focus on, it could be obvious, but why is this a Thanksgiving section? So we want to kind of look at what was the statement of Thanksgiving, what's the manner of Thanksgiving, and then we want to spend a few minutes on what's the immediate cause of Paul's Thanksgiving, and then a few minutes on what is his ultimate cause of Thanksgiving, as recorded in the scriptures, and then we're going to try a project together. So if looking in verse 2, says, we give thanks to God always for all of you. So there's our statement of thanksgiving, is we give thanks. And by the way, in his statement of thanksgiving, the first one he gives thanks to is God. So we give thanks to God. Now, he was thankful for them. He was thankful for the work that he was doing. But the number one, the statement is, we give thanks to God. And what a wonderful way for us to learn to consider when we start. You know, so often we begin our prayers with, what you can do for me, God, and how this and how that. But he started this prayer with thanksgiving to God for them. He's thankful to God for what they have done. So, and he's thankful always for all of you. He then deals with the manner of thanksgiving. In other words, how does Paul give thanks for them, always for them? Well, he gives thanks for them in verse 2, constantly remembering you in our prayers. In other words, his manner of thanksgiving for the Thessalonians was by prayer. He prayed for them. And this is fundamentally, it's intercessory prayer. He was praying not for himself. Now he prays for himself at the end of the epistle, but here he's really praying for them. He's interceding for them. And then what he does is he writes the immediate cause for thanksgiving. Because the question that would come up, if we had time, we were in my living room, we'd say, why was he thanking God for them? In other words, what was he thankful for? And why was he remembering them? Well, verse 3 tells us the immediate cause of his thanksgiving is what he remembered when he prayed for them. So he's thanking God for them. He's praying for them whenever he thinks about them. And what he remembers when he prays is actually three things. The immediate cause is three things that the Thessalonians are doing. In the REV, it says that he remembered before God and Father your work motivated by trust, your labor prompted by love, and endurance based on hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. So three immediate causes for thanksgiving that he acknowledges. Now, most people, most commentators, most scholars, and others, they tend to focus on the second part of these triads. In other words, they focus on what? Faith, love, and hope, because those are so foundational to Christianity. They come up in so many of Paul's writings and other writings of the New Testament. So often their attention is on faith, hope, and love, which is really important. But the first part of the triad is actually what? If I were to ask, and you're in your muted form, so I hear your words as you say them, but the first part is, what does it say? Your work, your labor, and your endurance, right? He's really focusing what he was remembering was their work and their labor and their endurance. So that's what he saw. That's what was happening. However, what was important is the motivation that drove that work and that labor and the endurance. The motivation behind it, what prompted it, is faith, love, and hope. So briefly, what does that mean? So the first So with the first one we see is the work that motivated by trust, as the REV says. What is the work motivated by trust? Or in Old King James, I think it's the work of faith, work motivated by trust. And if we had the time, we'd expand a lot of this. I'm going to suggest for now that although there's many possibilities around that, I'm going to suggest as we actually get into the letter over the weeks ahead, that it refers, well, first of all, we know generally it refers to some type of Christian activity that results from their faith or trust, right? And we could actually spend a bunch of time on, wait a minute, I thought Paul, faith and works are two opposites and all the stuff that he writes about it. And we could talk about all of that. However, here we're really looking at, we're not talking about how you're saved. It's not being saved. We all know we're saved by faith, but we also know that we were saved unto good works and that they were doing something. So I'm going to suggest that in the context of the occasion written, that Paul is, what he's seeing and what he's complimenting is their trust in God, even in the face of hardships. They were going through persecution, they were going through opposition, and yet they were trusting God and staying faithful to that. And we'll see that in the letter. So just as something to hold in place as a place setter. Now, labor of love, what is that all about? Well, fundamentally, it's going to refer again to activities or deeds that stem from love. So the motivation is love. You know, we can do works, but they're based on fear rather than love. We can do works, but we're based because we're worried. We're not trusting, we're worried. And here what the Thessalonians is, their works and their labor and their endurance behind it, underneath it, was love. Now, by the way, this word labor is a little stronger word than work. It's the word kopos for those that care. So it's stronger than just the work of faith, like ergon. So it involves not just doing something, but it also includes like hard work, like discomfort or hardship. So here, fundamentally, we don't know exactly what the labors of love were. We're going to learn more about it as time goes on. But fundamentally, it's referring, I believe, it's referring to the love the Thessalonians have demonstrated in their dealings with each other. When times are tough is when we tend to get raw with each other. And they were demonstrating love for one another in the midst of hardships. Now, the last one, endurance, the endurance of hope or steadfastness of hope. This word endurance, it's hypomone. It's commonly used both in Thessalonians and in the rest of the New Testament. It's generally used in connection with difficulties, persecutions faced by Christians, especially relating to, I'll use a big word for Jerry, the eschatological context. In other words, end times. So here, what is Paul doing? He's giving thanks. Paul and company are giving thanks to God for the Thessalonian steadfastness. In other words, he's thanking God because they were enduring and they had endurance and ongoing faith, even in the face of much affliction and opposition. This is really where the context is. And by the way, this faith doesn't just come from a feeble wish, or I hope so, or because I'm a Christian, or something that somehow things will turn out right because of God, or things like that. Rather, this is really about the hope of a confident belief in Jesus Christ. It is not merely a general hope in the Thessalonians about Christ and his finished work, but it's a very specific hope in Christ's imminent return from heaven to bring about their deliverance and their rescue. And therefore, they were able to carry on with endurance so they could work and they could labor and they could endure through the hardships they were dealing with. Now, that's the immediate cause of his thanksgiving, but there's a bigger cause, an ultimate cause, of his thanksgiving, and that has to do with that they were chosen by God. And that gets us into verse 4. So Jerry, talk to us a little bit more about this ultimate cause of thanksgiving as mentioned in verse 4.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to look at a very important statement that Paul makes about the Thessalonians. And one thing I wanted to mention is that the letter, I refer to it as Paul's letter because he's the predominant author. But as we saw, it's Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy. And that's why you'll see that there are plural pronouns going on here, not singular. But, you know, Paul, as the apostle, we attribute the letter to him as the one who's sort of the leader. And Silvanus or Silas is also another name for him in the New Testament. And Timothy were co-workers with Paul and helpers, and are sort of looked as being sort of trainees by him. So if I say the letter that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, I'm referring to this group of this triad here of these three individuals. So for the sake of convention, I just say Paul. But I just wanted to make that clear. Now, as Jeff was saying, you know, he talked about these work from trust, labor from love, endurance based upon hope. Paul then turns to say, we know, brothers and sisters, we know this about you, that you were chosen. The question then comes is, Paul knows they're chosen. Are you chosen? What makes somebody chosen? Does God choose you? Do you have any choice in the choosing? These are questions that we want to address here and talk about, because this is the way that we're going to understand how Paul is connecting with them in this introduction to the letter. He's going to make a point here about the Thessalonians and then talk a little bit more and expand upon it. But the point that he's going to say is that we know you were chosen because of certain things. That's in verse 5. Let's just read verse 5 before we go back. I'd like to say a few things about what it means to be chosen by God. So in verse 5, he says, because the good news did not come to you in word only, but also in other things, such as power, Holy Spirit, much assurance. So I don't want to get too deep into verse 5 right now. Let's backtrack to chosen by God. Now, in the Old Testament, God chose one person to begin working through to bring about the Messiah. His name was Abraham. God chose him and called him out of the Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. Well, later on, one of Abraham's descendants, Jacob, had a number of children called the children of Israel because Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And then God chose Israel to be the nation through which he would give his law and would show the world his goodness and would be a light to the rest of the nations in the world. So God chose the nation of Israel and to work through them. Then God chose Jesus of Nazareth. Well, he actually chose Mary, but he chose Jesus. And at Jesus's baptism, there's some famous words that God speaks over Jesus. That he is my chosen one in whom I am well pleased. And then we learn a lot about, for example, in Ephesians chapter 1, Paul there talks about that the believers in Ephesus, he tells them that they were chosen as well. But he tells them that God chose them, including Paul. He calls himself in that same one. He says, God chose us in him, Jesus, before the foundation of the world, to be holy and without blemish in his presence and love. So God is doing a lot of choosing here. The question is it just a one-sided thing? Is there a human element to this process, or just a divine initiative? I would say that if you look at all these different people that God chose, they weren't coerced. I mean, God, through the Lord Jesus, chose the Apostle Paul to be a minister to the Gentiles. But all of these people, including the nation of Israel, it all required them to respond to God. And if you guys read about this anytime, this is called synergism when it comes to soteriology, or the study of salvation, where God acts, God reaches out to his creation. He is the first one to initiate the reparation that has been caused by sin. But it also requires a human response to God's invitation. When God calls us, we have to then make a choice on whether or not we want to respond to that call, whether we want to receive the grace that God is offering to us. And so when Paul tells the Thessalonians that we know you are chosen, what he's saying is, we know that you guys accepted the gospel that we brought to you. You guys chose to believe. And because you chose to believe, that we know you're chosen, not just because of the word, the gospel we brought to you, but that your reception of that gospel message was met with demonstrations of power, which likely refers to miraculous deeds and other ways in which the Lord was showing forth his power among them, and in the reception of the Holy Spirit, which likely, if you take the pattern of the book of Acts, probably was accompanied by gifts of the Spirit, such as speaking in tongues, interpreting, prophesying, and other things. Maybe some healings or other things were happening. And then also in much assurance. Now this could be the apostles, Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy, and their conviction and confidence in expressing the gospel, but it could also be the Thessalonians, that when they saw, after receiving the word, the power, and experienced the Holy Spirit, they had conviction that they were God's chosen with all the other believers who have decided to embrace God's message and God's invitation. So this is important because Paul is basically reminding them about their conversion story. This is the point at which the Thessalonians said, yes. They said, yes. Yes, Paul, we want this hope. We want something more than these pagan idols that we see everybody worshiping, these lifeless idols. And just like them, there's also a point in our lives that we said yes to, right? There was a time when you heard the gospel and you decided that you wanted what that message promised. Paul is connecting back with his audience here at Thessalonica that he got ripped away from, and telling them that he's basically telling them, we know that you are part of us. You're part of the one body, God's chosen people. And we know this because when we were there and we preached, we saw power. We saw you guys receive the Holy Spirit. And there was lots and lots of assurance. So what I want to transition to now is I want you guys to think about when you said yes, when you embraced the gospel message of the Lord Jesus Christ. What was that like? And if somebody wrote you a letter and said, I remember you, I remember you when you received the word, and there was power and there was Holy Spirit, and we laughed and we had joy in our souls, and we knew that the future was worth living. What we're going to do is we're going to pause, and we're going to break you guys into one-on-one groups, and we'd like each person to share their conversion story, the way that Paul is recounting it here for the Thessalonians. Now, if you're a couple and you're sharing one device, we would like to ask, please somehow share the time of 5 minutes between both you and your spouse or whoever's with you. Because at one-on-one, each device is going to get 5 minutes each. And then we're going to bring you back together. So Janet, are we ready to launch them into a one-on-one pair to be able to share the conversion story?
We are.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys back in 10 minutes.
Jerry, did you want to say anything in summary? Do you want to say anything before we move on about?
Yeah. Let me just sort of come back around to the conversion and the Thessalonians. We wanted you guys to reflect upon the time when you received the word and you were at the point of decision making. And when Paul came to Thessalonica and he preached in the synagogue for 3 weeks, and then we don't know where else he preached, but we know that he did accumulate quite a massive following there of Gentiles, and by massive I just mean majority. And so it was important, we thought, to connect the letter that Paul's writing into our present lives, and where we've been, where we've come from. And that's sort of Paul is trying to recall to their memory this aspect of his visit, and it's one of the most important, and it is the ultimate reason he's writing to them. If they believed for a little time and then the cares of the world took them away and they left their faith behind, I don't think Paul would have had such an interest in writing a letter to them like this. But because they were standing in the Lord and they were God's chosen people and they had received and believed, then Paul's wanted to nurture that. And there have been people in our lives, every one of us I'm sure could probably testify, that people have been speaking into our lives and helping us grow in our faith since the day we said yes to the Lord. So, okay, well, Jeff, that's not the only thing Paul says to the Thessalonians here in his introduction. There are a few other things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of them, again, remember, our big theme of this section is what? Thanksgiving. So we've been talking about, I know this means Thanksgiving. It'll mean whatever we say each week. So tonight it means Thanksgiving. And so we looked at the immediate cause of Thanksgiving. It was their work and their labor and their endurance that was motivated by trust, love, and hope. We looked at the ultimate reason for their Thanksgiving, the ultimate cause, which is that they were chosen, as Jerry shared with us. They were chosen and they were standing. There are some additional causes of Thanksgiving, and we're just going to touch on them in the little bit of time that we have. Remember, Jerry left off in verse 5. Verse 5 was dealing with Paul's manner of entering to them, right? It was really dealing with the Paul's ministry and Silas and Timothy and how that ministry came to them, not in word only, but power, Holy Spirit, much assurance. He goes on to say, what manner of people we were among you. In other words, it's about how he conducted himself when he was there. Now, verse 6 deals with them and what they did and their exemplary life. So look at verses 6 and 7. They say, and you became imitators of us and of the Lord, having received the word with joy from the Holy Spirit, in spite of much affliction, so that you became an example to all those who believe in Macedonia. In other words, this is now, we've moved from Paul's manner to their reception of his manner. And they not only imitated Paul, obviously they took following Paul's example in order to follow the Lord. And isn't that what we all want to do ultimately? Isn't that what Jesus Christ asked his apostles and all the rest of us for the last 2,000 years is follow me. And they became imitators of Paul and company, and then of the Lord. And what he's praising them in is they received the word with joy of the Holy Spirit in spite of the affliction. And again, so in spite of the fact that there was hardship, opposition, persecution, and all the things that were going on, that we're going to read quite a bit more about it in the letter, they received the word, and there was a tremendous amount of joy among them with Holy Spirit. And I think back to Jerry's, if we think about our conversion story, for many of us, the joy that came in understanding and receiving Holy Spirit and know that we had it and we have conversion. And there's joy there, even though there may have been hardship or opposition or persecution or things like that. And the Thessalonians were, to the extent they became an example to all those who believe in Macedonia and Achaia. So then the next verse 8 is really about, he's thanking God, or he's a cause of thanksgiving is their evangelistic activity, because verse 8 says, for the word of the Lord has sounded forth from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but your trust toward God has gone out into every place, so that we do not need to say anything. In other words, the word was alive and it was moving, and he's thankful for the evangelistic activity that was coming out of the Thessalonians, not just in their town, but remember where Jerry showed us last week, they were on the Ignatian Way, they were in a seaport. That strategic location would allow people to come and go, and that word, it says here, got out everywhere, that evangelistic activity that was happening because of the Thessalonians. So it's very exciting. So then we pick up the last two areas for Thanksgiving are in verses 9 and 10. Jerry, what's in there? What else was Paul thankful for regarding the Thessalonians?
Well, Jeff, as I said before, the introduction here, kind of presets a little bit of a preview of what's going to come. And, you just shared about this affliction. So Paul's going to talk a lot about the affliction that they underwent, and we're going to look at that. That's in chapter 3 a little bit, and how they've been examples and their faith. He's going to talk a lot about their faith in chapter 3 as well. So their trust. And then he's going to talk about in chapter 2 next week, we're going to look at Paul's recounting his visit and the way that he and the other apostles, what he calls their manner of entering in among them. He's going to remind them of that when he came to them in a certain way, unlike other people of the time. There's a lot of competing influencers in the early church. There were lots of philosophers and orators and other people going around trying to vie for people's attention. Paul's going to talk about the way that they came to them which is unlike the way these other people come to them. And then the effect, they turned to the Lord. Now, we did talk about another theme that's going to come up as well in the beginning of chapter 4. So turning from God to idols, this is going to be that theme of holiness. And this is at the beginning of chapter 4. Now, the second half of chapter 4, many of us are probably quite familiar with. It deals all with the hope of Christ's return, the hope of the Lord's return, which is what Paul's saying here, that waiting for his son from heaven. That's what we are doing right now. We're waiting for the Lord to come back. And Jesus is that one, and that he is the one who's going to rescue us from the wrath to come. Hallelujah. Amen. So, Jeff, these are just a few little things that Paul is throwing out there that he's going to develop further on. So I think, if you guys are interested in seeing where Paul goes with these topics, come back next week as we begin to look at Paul's manner of entering in among the Thessalonians.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jerry. And there you go, if you're stop cheering. So, well, look, boys and girls, time flies when you're having fun. It's already 9 o'clock. So we're not going to have time for Q&As really tonight in any meaningful way. What I'd like to suggest, though, is if you've got questions or things that are on your heart for tonight, if you would shoot Janet an email, and Janet, most of you would know how to do that, but Janet, if you're still hanging in here somewhere, if you could put your email, your communication thing in the chat room so that folks could, here we go, right there. So Janet's got it. So if you've got questions on some of the things or other things you'd like to know more about or hear more about, if you would shoot those questions to Janet, Janet's going to get them to us. And next week when we pick up in chapter 2, we'll pick up, and first we may spend some time on some of those questions. So my encouragement to you this week is as you read Thessalonians, and remember, read it as a letter, read it if you can in one sitting. Sometimes people ask, well, what version should I read? And my answer would be any one that you will read. So if you've got a favorite, read that. If you've read all your favorites, find something else, check it out as something else, but read it as a letter. But what I encourage us all to do this week is think about those themes that are being foreshadowed. As we've been talking about it, as Jerry brought up, we've talked about themes of faith, hope, and love. We've talked about Paul's manner of entering, which is going to come up. We've talked about the persecution, the affliction of the Thessalonians. It's going to come up. We talked about the theme of holiness. It's going to come up in the letter. And finally, we've talked about the hope and see how those themes connect. So, anyway, we're beyond the witching hour. I always think about my friends in Ireland. And I think it's 9 o'clock. And for them, it's 10, 11, 12, 1. 2 o'clock for the Sweeneys. Is it 2 o'clock for the Sweeneys? So anyway, thanks for coming. Lots of fun. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Ellen. Have a wonderful night. And we will see everyone next week. God bless.